Hey everybody, we're going to go over the answers to test number 1. This is the first version. This video will be about the first 6 problems, so the problems that you see there. You'll also probably want your Trig identity sheet out in front of you. I believe yours is pink. Okay? So let's do number 1. We have cotangent squared x minus cosecant squared x all over cotangent squared x. Now I think a lot of you probably want to cross out the cotangent squared x because it's at the top and the bottom, but we can't do that because this one's being subtracted. You can only cross stuff out when it's being multiplied. So instead, I see that these are both squared. I think that maybe could be an identity, so I'm going to look on my formula sheet here. We have cotangent squared x minus cosecant squared x, and this one has cosecant squared minus cotangent squared. So when they're in the different order, that means that the answer is going to be negative. So this is going to become a -1 over the cotangent squared x. Then we have a 1 over cotangent. 1 over cotangent is from here. So 1 over cotangent is tangent, so 1 over cotangent squared would be tangent squared. And since we have a -1 at the top, the -1 would just go right in front of your tangent squared to make it a negative tangent squared x for your answer. Now, number 2. We have sine squared x times cosecant squared x plus secant squared x. Personally, I would double check that this middle part is not an identity. So I'm just gonna look at my identities here. I don't see anywhere that cosecant and secant are together. So I don't believe that's going to be an identity that I can change. Maybe this is one of those ones that we can distribute. So in this case, I would have sine squared x times cosecant squared x plus sine squared x times secant squared x. I can change my cosecant squared x to put it in terms of sine and cosine. And that's right here. Cosecant is 1 over sine. So cosecant squared is going to become 1 over sine squared. I have another sine squared there, times secant squared is 1 over cosine, so this is going to be 1 over cosine squared. Now because these are being multiplied, I can cross out my sine squared x's, and I have 1 plus. Nothing crosses out here. We have sine squared x times 1 is sine squared x. And then we're left with a cosine squared x at the bottom. And then you might be like, oh my gosh, I remember that sine squared x and cosine squared x. That's a quotient identity. Sine over cosine is tangent, so sine squared over cosine squared would be tangent squared. 1 plus tangent squared is a Pythagorean identity. It equals secant squared. So that's your answer for number 2. Now number 3, we have sine x times cosine x over 1 plus sine x times 1 plus sine of negative x. Now the first thing that jumps out to me is that this part is different than everything else that we have done so far because I have a negative x that I'm taking the sign of. That's a even and odd identity. It's right here. So it's going to become negative sine x. And for me personally, I think I'm going to have to distribute the bottom before I do anything else. So we have 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times negative sine x is negative sine x. Sine x times 1 is sine x. And sine x times negative sine x is negative sine squared x. Now I have a positive sine x and a negative sine x. Those make 0, so they can go away. And 1 minus sine x is a Pythagorean identity. That's right here. I don't know if you guys can see. It equals cosine squared x. So that is the same as me writing cosine times cosine at the bottom. So one of my cosines is going to cancel out. 1 cosine at the top, 1 cosine at the bottom, and that leaves me a sine x over a cosine x, which is a quotient identity, the same as right there. So my final answer is going to be tangent x. All right, so those are the first 3 problems on test number 1, version 1. Now we are going to do 4, 5, and 6, but I have to erase. 1 sec. All right, so for number 4, you have cosecant x over sine x minus cotangent x over tangent x. Now, normally for fraction problems, we try to get the same denominator. But to me, that seems a little bit complicated in this problem. So I'm going to change everything to sines and cosines. So we have cosecant x. Cosecant becomes 1 over sine. And then I'm going to leave my sine x alone. Remember to make your division bar longer than your fraction bar, so that way you can tell what you need to flip in the bottom. Cotangent x is, we don't want to use 1 over tangent, because that does not change to sines and cosines. We want to change it to sine over, oops, wrong one. Cotangent changes to cosine over sine x. Divided by tangent, which is the sine x over cosine x. Now remember, when you have something in the denominator, you multiply by its reciprocal. So sine x is really over 1, so I'm going to flip it and multiply by 1 over sine x. I'm going to take this one and flip it and multiply by cosine x over sine x. So I get 1 times 1 is 1. Sine x times sine x is sine squared x. Minus cosine times cosine is cosine squared. Sine times sine is sine squared. Now we have the same denominator, so we can condense them. We can push them together. We would have the top be 1 minus cosine squared x over sine squared x. Now 1 minus cosine squared x, that's an identity. it equals sine squared x. And sine squared x over sine squared x crosses out to make 1. Now number 5, it's down here. I don't know if you guys can see it. Cosine of negative x times secant x plus cotangent squared x. Now this cosine of negative x, that's an even and odd identity. So for cosine of negative x, the negative goes away and they get cosine x times secant x plus cotangent squared x. We keep my cosine, change secant to be 1 over cosine. And then the cosines cancel because I have 1 at the top and 1 at the bottom. And I'm left with 1 plus cotangent squared x, which is another identity. It's cosecant squared x. And lastly here we have secant x times sine over tangent of negative x. So first do your even and odd identity. Tangent of negative x is negative tangent x. Now secant, I can change that into sines and cosines. Secant is 1 over cosine. And negative tangent, well, tangent sine over cosine, so negative tangent would be negative sine x over cosine x. Now we do want to take our denominator and multiply by the reciprocal. So I have 1 times sine x times cosine x. And then in the denominator I have cosine x times negative sine x. So I have a sine x at the top and the bottom which can cancel, a cosine at the top and the bottom that can cancel. So I'm left with 1 divided by a negative, so that's going to give me a negative 1.